MLB winter meetings are off to the races, and we have some news regarding the Phillies trade discussions, particularly as it pertains to White Sox pitcher Garrett Crochet. I want to break down the price point that is being talked about, what has been shot down by the White Sox organization that the Phillies have reported to be offering, and just how much sense that Garrett Crochet truly does make for this Phillies team. Is this the guy that can take them over the edge and make them this real deal World Series contender? But before I dive fully into those questions, let's start right at the top with the reports that we do have. This coming from Bob Nightingale here that says, quote, the White Sox have had serious talks with the Philadelphia Phillies, but rejected the concept of Alec Boehm and outfielder Justin Crawford for Garrett Crochet. So very interesting to me that we're seeing these specific names here. There's obviously been a ton of talk, and we broke down from a ton of different angles about the Alec Boehm trade talks on this channel, but surprising to me to see Justin Crawford mentioned as a specific name here. Now, I agree with Dave Dombrowski's sort of assessment that now is the time to cash in those prospects for real deal MLB players that can contribute at this current moment. It's kind of surprising to me to see Crawford as a name mentioned, but ultimately these trade talks were rejected by the White Sox. So they are hoping for more than that. Now, to talk about Garrett Crochet, we know who he is as a pitcher. That in 32 games this season, he pitched 146 innings, allowed 18 home runs, 209 strikeouts, and 123 hits allowed. So just 7.6 hits per 9 innings there. 3.58 ERA, a 1.068 whip. Still just 25 years old. This is a guy who has a bright future ahead of him, and clearly the White Sox are looking to cash in on this from a trade standpoint, and Crochet kind of trying to find his long-term home here. Now, I've not been the most positive Garrett Crochet guy on this channel, and I do want to talk a little bit about specifically why. That this was a guy that we talked about leading up to the deadline as a potential fit for this Phillies team, but his tone and kind of his expectations were not that screamed to me this is a missing piece on a contending roster. And what I mean by that specifically, do want to pull up this article here that kind of dives into it, and it says, quote, it's believed that part of the reason Crochet wasn't traded is because of comments made in the days leading up to the deadline. At the time, he communicated through his representatives that he wanted a contract extension. Crochet will be in his second arbitration year in 2025, and Spot projects him at $2.9 million, and did not want to move to the bullpen with a new team. Quote, there were clearly a lot of questions about the message that was put out there, how it truly affected the trade market. It's really tough to measure, Getz said, which is the White Sox GM. Quote, the conversations that I had about Garrett prior to the last couple of weeks, or perhaps even earlier, was about how we plan on navigating the remainder of the season and the communication that we had with Garrett and his agent in mapping it out. So everyone felt comfortable and still allowed him to go out there and do what he likes, and that's compete and take the ball. And to kind of continue off this point here, that Crochet specifically, my part two, is, quote, I was hoping to get a little bit of an innings base under my belt this year so that I could do that a little bit easier, Crochet said. At the end of the day, I feel like that sort of routine is a better routine for me based on the bumps and bruises that have been happening. I feel like I have the stuff to fulfill that role. I just want the opportunity to do it. Quote, he hasn't started in a couple years, Getz said, so it's going to take a little bit of time to appropriately stretch him out. We're going in with the intention for him to be a starter in 2024. So a couple points that I do want to hit on here. For starters, obviously the Phillies are in a different spot now when building and bringing in a player at the start of the season than would have been the case at the trade deadline this year. That when talking about Crochet at the deadline, I did view the need or the target that the Phillies should be looking for is a guy who can be that fifth starter that, can take the ball from the Tyler Phillips of the world and the Taijuan Walkers that quite clearly were not good enough. But I did think that in the long view, or when looking at last year's playoff run, it was pretty likely that guy that would need to be able to pitch out of the bullpen. And I didn't love the unwillingness that Crochet was very clearly putting out there for that type of role. Now, I don't feel as strongly about that now that this is starting from the full season. And when looking at the Phillies depth chart, it is clear why this is a reason that Dave Dombrowski has this circled. Obviously, a very top-heavy rotation. You can't get much better than Zack Wheeler and Aaron Nola as your top two arms. Christopher Sanchez, we will see what version of Chrissy Sanchez shows up this year, but it's tough not to be impossibly encouraged by the version that we saw last year. I'm very excited to see if he can continue building off this. And Ranger Suarez, a little bit more concerned about Ranger from the standpoint of there are a lot of trade talks. This is a guy that I genuinely believe in very highly and want to stick around Philadelphia forever. This is him heading into the final year of his contract, so it wouldn't surprise me if he's looking for, or they're not confident that he can resign him or something along those lines. But it has been surprising to see how many rumors have connected to Ranger being on the chopping block. And now looking at that fifth spot specifically there, Taijuan Walker is not a guy you can roll into this season with him as the fifth starter. Now, the Phillies have been pretty upfront about that, talking about how they have a plan in place to hopefully rehab his arm, get his velocity up, and bring him back to the pitcher that they signed him to be. But the results have been pretty far from encouraging. Now, I give Taijuan Walker a lot of love for the way that he continues to handle his business, act like a professional. And this is not a guy that is just tanking or not trying out there. He cares. He's been a good character and a good player on this team. But the reality is he just is not the caliber of pitcher that they hoped they were signing. And you got to adjust and plan accordingly here. So that is where Garrett Crochet comes in. Now, to talk more specifically about this kind of specific deal that is going down or is being discussed at the minimum here, it's clear to me that Dave Dombrowski is doing this kind of risk analysis, that obviously Alec Bohm is one of these significant trade chips that he has, but there's multiple players that it could be moved for. And when speaking about what the exact targets are, Dombrowski has laid out the wish list to us quite clearly. That he said, that speaking to Todd Zielecki here, that Dombrowski said this week that his offseason priorities have not changed. They need an outfielder to play left or center field, a late inning right-handed reliever, and a number 5 starter. I think Crochet is significantly better than your average run-of-the-mill number 5 starter. I think in general, the conversations about the 5th starter role last year were a little bit overblown. This is more of an MLB issue than a Phillies issue. That you look around the rest of the league, you can see there's just not a lot of rotations that have 5 good pitchers on it. They're a dying breed these days. We see the bullpen games constantly. That's kind of modern baseball. I think that's one of those things has certainly gone down. Now, Crochet is a guy that can absolutely take the ball every 5 games. And I think conceptually, when kind of breaking down why the Phillies are targeting in this area, I kind of had a sit back and realization moment that obviously Juan Soto continues to be the prince of the offseason. At the time of recording this, we still don't know who he will be signing with. It seems to be pretty much down to the 2 New York teams, maybe a little bit of a splash of a prayer from the Red Sox and the Dodgers if you're still holding that hope. But in reality, it does feel like it's going to be between the Yankees and Mets, which is what I think everyone expected in the beginning of all this. When thinking about building out a roster to compete with these teams, with the Yankees, with the Dodgers, with the Mets, I don't think it can be done by adding more bats to this Phillies lineup. That you kind of have made your bet with the Trey Turners of the world, the Bryce Harpers of the world, the Nick Castellanos, the Kyle Schwarbers. These are good players that this team has. The way that I do think that you can find a way to be better than them is if you can beef up your pitching staff to the point where it is clearly the better staff when matching up with them. I do just think it's going to be tough from a money standpoint. Once again, the Phillies are already paying the second most of any franchise in the league right now. This has not been a lack of money thing from John Middleton or Dave Dombrowski here. They clearly want to win. They clearly have the desire and are willing to open the pockets to do it. But you got to make sure that you are assigning that to the right players and make sure you're building this team the right way. I don't know if I see a bat out there. And Juan Soto, there's obviously is a pipe dream that has been shut down rather quickly. He's probably an exception to the rule when kind of talking about this. When you're looking at some of the money that the Teoscar Hernandez of the world are getting, or all these guys that are signing these contracts, it's a lot to give for players that may not be that caliber of player. I do think pitching's a different ballgame with that. That you can bring in additional arms. You obviously can't sign 2 shortstops, but you can bring in as many pitchers as you possibly want, and that may be the route that this team is trying to go. Now, to talk about the winter meeting schedule, did want to just address when exactly it's going to go down and why this is so important. So the schedule for the week that is going down, it has started Sunday evening, which is me at the time of recording this. So you'll get a little bit of that face-to-face interaction, begin to shake hands. You're not working through the phones. You can talk to these guys, have a little bit more of an honest conversation. Then there will be the Baseball Hall of Fame Classic. Should be fun to watch. That it's going down at 7:30, so right around the time that I'm recording this. The draft lottery will take place Tuesday at 5:30. The Rule 5 draft will be Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and then winter meetings end on Thursday. So really what this is just kind of a conference of MLB executives and front office members where you can have a chance to sit in the same room, have those conversations, and figure out how can we help you? What players are you looking to move on from, and who are you targeting? What positions of need do you still have that we may not be able, or we may be able to help with? So for the Phillies specifically, I think Dave Dombrowski is going to be wheeling and dealing better than just about anyone in this room. That these are the opportunities that he should absolutely be leaping at, and it does seem the early indications that that is exactly the case. So I would be pretty shocked at this time tomorrow if we don't have some more concrete rumors flying out of there. I'm sure the reporters are circling those rooms trying to get any sort of little crumb of intel that they can find, and I do think the Phillies are going to be attached to quite a few of them. So make sure you stay tuned for all the news that will be going down. I'll be back on here tomorrow chopping it up with Luke Arcana to talk a little bit about what is going on around with the team. So make sure you're tapping in with that. Smash that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop your comments below on this video, your thoughts on Garrett Crochet, and drop a like if you have not already. I'll be back talking to you next time, this time tomorrow. Peace.